Thank you very much. Thank you. John, thank you for that very nice introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, special guests, it's a delight to be here. It's a delight to be here because I got an applause. In Washington, I don't get applauses like that. Sometimes the chambers are empty when I give a speech. But it is real nice to be here. And I am delighted to help celebrate this birthday because I consider it very important, or I wouldn't be here. But, you know, this has been a pretty special week for all of us, not only in Washington, but taxpayers all around the country as well. But I do have some good news. We're out of session, and hopefully we're not going back very soon. The bad news, of course, is we couldn't leave until they ended up spending about $800 billion, and they don't even know where they're going to spend it. Today they decided, well, let's look around. How are we going to spend all that money that we have? So that's the bad news, but that's been going on. It's been going on a lot longer than this year. It looks like it's been going on for many decades, but I believe it's coming to an end. You know, it has been said and commented about me being called Dr. No, but my wife has a pretty good answer for that one, too. She says, it's okay. They can call you Dr. No, but tell them it's spelled with a K. Now, Mr. Welch earlier on gave his very important constitutional talk, and he used a really neat quote from Greenspan, which I've used in the banking committee on occasion too, dealing with the gold standard. Of course, Alan Greenspan wrote that in 1966. He wrote it when he was associated with Ayn Rand. He wrote it in the Objectivist newsletter. And I happen to have been reading the Objectivist newsletter in 1966, and there was one day that I was scheduled to meet with Mr. Greenspan. The various members were able to meet with him and chat a few minutes and get a picture. And I thought, well, I'll take advantage of that opportunity. So I knew the meeting was coming, so what I did was I dug this old copy out of the Objectivist newsletter, and that specific copy, the original copy of that article. So when I went in and sat down with him, I pulled it out, and it was a green booklet, but it was pretty faded. And I said, do you recognize this? Do you remember this? And he says, yeah, I do. And and then I flipped it open to the article on Golden Freedom article. And I said, do you recognize this? And he said, yeah, I do. And I said, would you mind autographing this? So as he was signing, I said, do you want to put a disclaimer on it? And he said no, he had read it recently, and he still endorsed everything he wrote in the article. Now, you try and figure that one out. But anyway, it was entertaining, and I have that copy, and I don't know whatever happened to it. One of my kids will get it someday, something like that. But it is a great opportunity tonight to come and visit with so many friends. It reminds me of my first election. Politics is sometimes a lot of luck. Matter of fact, maybe it's a lot of luck. Because so many young people come to my office and they say, well, my goal is to be a congressman. What do I do? And I say, well, don't have a goal to be a congressman. That's the first thing. What I urge them to do is go and study and understand the issues, and then be available, and there'll be a job for you, and maybe there'll be a political career, but it's pure luck. Because in 1974 was the first time I ran for office, and it was, my concern for the monetary system, the breakdown of the Bretton Woods Agreement, the wage and price controls that Mr. Welch mentioned, because they were so devastating. And the markets rallied, and everybody was excited. The Chamber of Commerce endorsed the wage and price controls and high tariffs, and I thought it was just total nonsense. But at that time, there were a total of, I think, 4 Republicans in all of Texas. And I was running against a Democrat that had, a long-term incumbent. There had never been a Republican in that seat. And in '74, I lost that election. But the being in the right place at the right time was demonstrated because shortly after that he resigned from office, and there was a special election changing the dynamics of the election. And by that time, it was early 1976 when I was elected. I'm sure there are people in this room probably helped me at that time because I know so many of you have over the years. But I remember the first press conference we had. That class would have been the 1974 Watergate class, which meant I think there were a total of new Republicans of 14, and they were only replacements because I don't think Republicans won any Democratic seats at that time. And at the time, Ford was president. And this was an exciting time because being sworn in by yourself is quite a bit different than when all 435 are being sworn in. So there was a large press conference because they were wondering what it meant for a Republican to win, whether there was a shift in political sentiments or just what. So it was a large press conference. It was held at the Capitol Hill Club, and I can remember the very first question. Somebody from Houston who was an antagonist all along, he got up and his first question was, Mr. Paul, he says, are you a member of the John Birch Society? Have you ever been a member of the John Birch Society? I said, no, I'm not a member, but tell you the truth, the members of the John Birch Society have been very good friends of mine. They've been very helpful in my campaign. But interesting things are happening. This last year and a half for me has been a lot more dramatic than I ever dreamed. It was almost 2 years now that a few of my close friends and maybe some of you wrote to me and said that I should get involved in the presidential primary. I was very reluctant to do that because I was convinced that we had not done enough work. Now, the John Birch Society has done a lot of work for a lot of years, and yet I was still of the belief that we still had a while to go to educate and get people excited to really change anything, and thought that there would be a very minimal reception. The truth is, it turned out the reception was much bigger than I ever dreamed of. There was There was a lot of excitement, and what fascinated me the most was the young people. The young people came, and the rallies kept getting bigger, and the kids were enthusiastic. And then there was this little thing called the internet and YouTube, and all the activity went on. It fascinated me to no end to see young people, teenagers, some that aren't even the age of voting, would bring their parents, and finally got their parents interested in politics and interested in our politics. And so the young people are very open to this message, and that is, I think, one of the best things that have come out of this campaign. The other thing that I was fascinated with, the older kids, the young people in colleges, were fascinated with the monetary issue. Who would have ever dreamed that you could go to a campus, University of Southern California and the University of Michigan, get hundreds and sometimes over 1,000 young people out cheering and chanting, get rid of the Fed, end the Fed. I mean, I couldn't believe it. And one of the consequences of all this has been that, unfortunately, though, a lot of our predictions and my predictions I've been making over these many years, they're coming true. You know, and the other day they mentioned that on one, I think it was CNN, that well, he's made some predictions and they've come out that way. I said, to tell you the truth, I really hope we don't. You know, these predictions don't come out the way I predict. But the fact that it is happening that way, our views are all of a sudden getting a lot more attention. They're talking about Austrian economics. The day we walked over, which would have been probably Monday when we had the vote, and possibly they were there on Friday as well when we repeated the vote, but there were young people, teenagers, carrying signs with Mises's name, von Mises's name, demonstrating in front of the Capitol. But I marveled at the rallies. The people came, and one thing that was characteristic of the rallies was it was made up of a lot of people from different walks of life. All kinds of economic backgrounds, all kinds of religious backgrounds, and believe it or not, from all political parties. Because I would go down the list, and I'd sort of kid, and I'd say, oh, well, are any Republicans here? Oh yeah, there were some Republicans. Any independents? And the independents would cheer. There may even be some Democrats here. And then the Democrats would cheer. And there would be Green Party people there, people who had in the past supported Ralph Nader. And I came firmly to the conviction that freedom is popular and freedom brings people together, and the Constitution is not divisive, and if we stick to that, we can bring people together and energize the young people. But a lot of credit has to go to those individuals and those groups that kept the spirit alive. And that's what I think the Birch Society has done. In these last 50 years, quietly but steadily, and under sort of difficult circumstances at times, taking a lot of hits, but yet sticking to the Constitution, teaching, education. That was the most important role, and it continues to be the most important role, not only for the Birch Society, but for all of us. It's education to understand why freedom works, how to defend it, making ourselves available, participate in the political process. And you don't have to get involved in running for office or supporting candidates, even though that's important. You can do it anyway. You can be teachers or get into the media and writing and all the different things. The important thing is the message. Now, I see what has happened over these many years that the Birch Society has done is just planted a lot of seeds. A lot of seeds have been planted, and they're coming to fruition. They're bursting forth. And therefore, we were able to tap into this sentiment. And this to me has just been wonderful. It seems like there always has been and always will be a remnant, no matter what is happening in society. The remnant holds the truth together, both religious truth and political truths. And that has been the important role for the Birch Society, is to tell these truths and make sure people know about it and understand it. And now we have another whole new generation. These young kids wouldn't necessarily have been exposed to the John Birch Society, but they are going to be interested. They're interested in these views. That doesn't mean they're all going to join, and they don't necessarily have to. But the message is key. That's what we have to do. We have to put it out there. And it is right. Not only because the message is right, but we have now lived for so long with the decline of freedom that we have been tolerant of that because we have been so wealthy. We have learned to be and conditioned to be a materialistic society. We were more concerned about the redistribution of wealth, and we have been so wealthy that it didn't matter. People didn't think about where the wealth came from. But all of a sudden now, people are realizing that we're getting near the end, that we aren't as wealthy as we once thought. We are now dependent on borrowing money, inflating the currency, and that things are coming to an end. And I think, and I said this on the House floor this very week, yes, they're very concerned about a liquidity crisis. And all we have to do is print more money and it's going to solve a liquidity crisis. I mean, it is so far removed from reality. What is happening is, and I said this very clearly, that this is a sign that the country is now bankrupt, and people are recognizing it. And now what we have to do is restore the confidence in our system, restore the confidence in freedom, so we can go back to work again. Because we can't live on borrowed money forever. Individuals understand this very clearly. I mean, if somebody overextends themselves, they get too much in debt, and the bank won't loan them any more money. They have to, if they are a moral person, they're going to pay off their debt, they're going to quit spending, they're going to go back to work and take an extra job and pay off the bills. A country does it a little bit differently because they wait as long as possible, but they inevitably will bankrupt the country, destroy the currency. This is a very dangerous period that we're living in. But at the same time, it gives us a grand opportunity. Now, I can assure you, and I don't think you will need much convincing, that we still don't have enough help in Washington. Believe me, we need a lot more help in Washington in order to pick up the pieces. But I am more optimistic now than I was 2 years ago. Not because Washington has changed, but because I have met so many people. How large the remnant is, the people have been out there. You can't count the remnant, but I saw the remnant. And the remnant is alive and well. And the young people are willing to listen. They understand it. I kidded in many of the rallies and would say, well, you know, we beat up on public education a lot, and it deserves to. But I'll tell you one thing. Your generation has learned your arithmetic, because you've added it up and you know you're getting the bill and you're getting a bad deal. The young people don't believe they're going to get anything out of Social Security. They know that, and they're frightened about it. And they know the wars are going on, and they don't look like they're going to end. And I took, of course, the position that Mr. Welch repeated in the speech here, and I was delighted to hear how clear he was about minding our own business and taking care of ourselves and defending this country and not policing the world. But the young people know they're going to bear the burden, the financial burden. And young people so often these days aren't joining the military because they want to go off and fight a war. Just think of the thousands of young unmarried women with children are in the military because they want a weekend job to make a couple bucks, and they pick in the reserves and Air National Guard, and they get sent over to Iraq and then potentially into Pakistan and Afghanistan, all these places. That's not what they want. I was most impressed and most pleased during the campaign because I took the licks from the audiences. I can remember in South Carolina when I was hit pretty hard when I talked about the non-interventionist foreign policy, and there was a lot of booing and hissing that I was unpatriotic and all this stuff they accused me of. Yet at the same time, when we added up all the money that came from the active military and retired military, I was getting more donations than all the rest put together. Young people also know that there's still a selective service that they have to sign up for. And if we come up short on troops, the individuals in Washington would not hesitate to reinstate the draft. Now, if you want to talk about a vicious attack on personal liberty, it is the military draft. We should never have to have a military draft. It was exciting to see the young people come in, and I will inevitably ask them, what was it that attracted you to the campaign? Was there a specific issue, or was it something in general? And sometimes it would be general. Well, it sounded like you were the only one telling the truth. That was, that was sad that I was the only one. But that's the only way they would say. Then they say, I'd like you to talk about the Constitution. And well, that is very good. So they had good answers. But sometimes it would be one single issue. But here we are. We're living in an age today where there's no respect whatsoever in Washington for the Constitution. When it comes to monetary policy, do we follow the Constitution? Obviously not. But what about going to war? Ever since World War II, there's never been a declaration of war. We go to Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, and all the other smaller wars around the world. But Congress has been totally irresponsible. And it isn't so much that we couldn't do it, but we don't do it. But this last go-around, we passed a resolution, and tragically, the resolution to go into Iraq was a resolution that said we had to do it for national security, based on all the lies that we were told, of course. But it also, tragically, was to enforce UN resolutions. That was the reason that we were given the president this authority to go to war if he wanted to. If he didn't want to, he didn't have to. But national sovereignty, and I don't need to tell anybody in this audience about it, is so important. That is why every single year I introduce the bill to get us out of the United Nations. Another thing that young people like to hear about is personal liberty, personal choices, personal responsibility. And some would say, yes, they want license and they want to do whatever they want. But no, they were willing very often to accept the principle of self-reliance. Because I tell them, don't come to me if you want student loans. Come to me if you want to get rid of your income tax and get out of Social Security. And they would like that. They understood this. They want to assume their responsibility for themselves. And that should encourage all of us that they're thinking in these terms. But they do like the ideas of personal liberty, making personal choices. And there was always a good response when I told them, look, you can make personal choices and you can make bad choices. You can decide what you're going to put into your mind and put into your body and put into your soul. But if you make mistakes, you can't go crawling to the government and have them take care of you if you mess up your own life. And this was well received. You know, for some reason, we as a nation have been pretty well conditioned to allow intellectual freedom. We're allowed to read and have First Amendment rights, even though they're under attack all the time. And yet we recognize that our religious belief in dealing with what we believe is good for our soul is generally accepted. But for some reason, in the last 50, 60, 70 years, we have assumed that none of us are smart enough to know what's to put into our bodies. And yet it's really the same. Why should the government have to give us permission when to take vitamins and take nutritional products and make these choices? Oh, yeah, you might make a mistake, and that's why we need the FDA to tell you exactly what to do and when. Well, then they also tell you when you have to get your shots and what to do, how many immunizations that you have to have. Which reminds me of a very good friend that we lost a few years back, and that is, when I made that decision to run in 1974, the person I called was Larry McDonald, a great American. And I told Larry I was thinking about running for Congress and what advice he could give me. His advice, I remember, was that, well, run in the party where you think you can win, because he realized the parties were irrelevant. It was just to see where you could be the most successful. At the time, of course, I was doing that more as a lark. I didn't believe I would end up being in the Congress with him, but we did. But I remember in 1976, must have been the first year I was there, we had a vote, and I bet you some of you remember this. There was this flu scare. And the federal government, we have to give everybody a flu shot. So they appropriated these huge amounts of money to promote these flu shots for everybody. And there were 2 no votes against that. And there were 2 doctors that voted against it. 2 doctor no's then. But that one, we were vindicated on that because there wasn't too many years later. Not only did they waste the money, but a lot of people got sick. More people died from the shot than they did if they'd have gotten the flu. So that's what we don't need, is mandatory medical care from the federal government. Just as now, what are they mandating? It is mental health testing for every one of our kids in school. And there's 10 on these test programs already. They're getting about 10%. They're putting on psychotropic drugs because they don't want any young kid to fall through the track. And we have to make sure that they don't have a hidden mental health disease. These are the kind of things that are just an outrage. And these are also the kind of things that young people know about and that like to assume their responsibility for themselves. So whether it's foreign policy or personal liberty or economic issues, I believe, and I am absolutely convinced, we're on the right track on that. I was never convinced during the campaign that I'd be the right candidate to rally the troops. But I know one thing, and I'm convinced absolutely that our message of freedom is correct. Freedom does bring people together. The opposite divides people. When a country is going bankrupt and everything is run by the special interest, it becomes very divisive. That's why the parties fight over everything. Everybody's fighting, not so much that they have a different philosophy, but they're fighting over which special interest group is going to protect and which one has the power. And this is where we are today. We're fighting over a dwindling, shrinking pie. And this was predictable. I mean, we knew this was coming. Today we're in the midst of a financial crisis. This is very, very serious. And we have so many proposals to do what? To spend more money, run up more debt, print more money, and write more regulations. How did we get into this mess? We printed too much money, we spent too much money, we had too much debt, we had too many regulations. And they think that's a solution. The solution, of course, is if we just followed the Constitution, had limited government, and work our way out of it. So some on the news programs now, I do get, and this I think is a benefit, I get a lot more calls now just to talk about economic policy, and they say, what would you do? Would you do nothing? Well, the truth is they should be doing practically nothing. It wouldn't be a bad idea. It would be a lot better than doing a lot of harm. First, do no harm. But you don't have to say do nothing. What we could do is have a government do what they're supposed to do. How about having sound money? They're not supposed to be the counterfeiters of the world. They're supposed to protect the value of the currency. They always want regulation. I said, all right, let's have regulation. Let's regulate the Federal Reserve Board, and let's regulate the President's Working Group on Financial Markets, and let's regulate the Exchange Stabilization Fund. Let's regulate the government regulators. That's the type of gun control I like, too. Yeah, I like to control the guns, but I'd like to take the guns away from all the government bureaucrats. The 80,000 that are patrolling our streets today. So there are a lot of things. We can lower taxes and we can protect contracts. Today, this mischief that they're involved with are actually violating contracts. They're not honoring contracts. And, of course, the money issue is a contract. But what we need to do is get the government out of the business of allocating resources, allocating capital. That is what is the problem with inflation. When the Federal Reserve increases the money supply, they artificially lower the interest rates, pretending that there's a lot of savings. We have zero savings, but the businessman and the consumer assumes, well, there's a lot of savings out there, so therefore this is the time to buy and invest. But at the same time, what we're doing is we're building up debt, and we build up malinvestment, and we keep building up the bubbles, and the bubbles can start bursting, but just think of how many times, especially Alan Greenspan, over all those years would paper over any hint of a correction. The market wants to correct the mistakes. The government always wants to paper them over and pretend that you can have a new economic era, which they've talked about for so long, and it never comes about. So they keep papering over, but they've gotten away with it for so long that the bubble is so big right now, it is coming to an end. So it is the bankruptcy of this country that we're dealing with. We're not dealing with a financial crisis on Wall Street. And this means there is an economic crisis not only here, but it's worldwide, because the dollar is the reserve currency of the world. It is different than any before. I think this is the biggest bubble in the history of mankind. And therefore, the correction is going to be very, very difficult. But what they're doing now, and I've been quoted in the media in this very week, is that they're doing the very thing, but in a more massive way, what we did in the Depression. We try to prop up the mistakes and the bad debt and not allow the correction to occur. So therefore, everything that we were pretending to do this week as a benefit is actually very detrimental, and will turn it into a depression if we don't wake up. Now, people say during the week they would lobby and they say, if you don't vote for this, we're going to have a tough economic downturn. I said, you're right. It's going to be tough if we don't vote for that. But if we do vote for it, it's going to be a lot worse. And but the recession or depression is locked into place by the previous inflation. So the inflation of the 20s guaranteed that there would be a recession. But the 1921 recession coming out of World War I was short because we didn't try to prop it up and delay it. By the time we got to the 30s, we were so much smarter that we could, take care of everything and make sure nobody suffered. Then we had the Grand Depression. And then the grand fallacy that came out of that, well, first they said it was capitalism and the gold standard was the cause, and the solution was war. And we haven't overcome that yet. There's still a lot of people in this country that believe a war economy is beneficial to us. A war economy is never beneficial. Sure, they say, well, you build an airplane. You build an airplane, the worker gets good salaries, and the corporations have war profits. Yeah, but how many other people lost? And what did you produce? An airplane or a helicopter or bullets and bombs that go over and bomb somebody? Weakens our national defense because we have more enemies. Then, of course, when we bomb somebody, we always have to go and rebuild it. Makes no sense. And we've been over there 10 years even before we got into the invasion. All through the 90s, we kept bombing Iraq, and now we've destroyed so much of their infrastructure, and we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars over there. So first, you're taxed to blow up their bridges, then you're taxed to rebuild the bridges. At the same time, our own bridges are falling down. And we're broke. But guess what? The good news is coming to an end. The empire is going to end. Not because I'm going to be persuasive or they'll pay any attention to my floor speeches, but because we will not be able to afford it. There's only one question: what will come of it all? We're not a whole lot different than the situation the Soviet Empire was in 1989. They lost not because we bombed them and fought with them. We didn't have to. It was a non-viable economic system. And they finally went broke, and they had to leave Afghanistan and pull back. And then that's what will happen to us. But you'd think we would learn a lesson. You'd think we would understand that. There we were back when we were fighting the Soviets. Our own CIA supported and sponsored radical Islam to go with Osama bin Laden to fight the Soviets, and now they've turned against us, and we wonder why. Well, it shouldn't be that hard to figure out. Then if they just look and listen to what Osama bin Laden has been saying, it's not that complicated. He said, well, we can't stand your occupation over here. You prop up puppet governments and you put troops on our holy land, and we don't like it. We want you out of here, and we're going to teach you a lesson. And so they attack us. And he says, well, what we'll get you to do is get you involved in a land war over here. And what do? It was beyond their expectations. Here we are in Afghanistan and in Iraq, threatening Iran. Now we're fighting with Pakistan, and we're sending more money to Georgia. And the whole goal of Osama bin Laden was to get us so engaged that it would diminish our national defense, demoralize our people here, and bankrupt our country. And they say that if you say those kind of things, I'm unpatriotic, that we're unpatriotic. But a true patriot isn't one that succumbs to and obeys everything our government tells us. It's to believe in the people and to believe in the country and to believe in freedom. That's what patriotism is all about. So my answer to the many problems we have today is to continue what you have been doing. Continue to educate. Continue to rally the troops. You've had a grand rally here. We had one a few weeks ago that John participated in. But this was a grand rally too. You had a lot of people show up. I understand there may even be some people that aren't even in this room. They may be out and around and listening. And this means there is a lot of interest, and the opportunity is there, and we must continue with this momentum. Not with the idea that all of a sudden we're to change the Congress, and I know that's always been one of the goals of the Birch Society, and I think it's a proper goal, is to work with changing Congress, and we have to continue to do that. But I'm not optimistic enough to say that next year we're going to get 5, or this year we'll get 5 new with the next year 20, and soon we're going to have a majority, and we're going to pass laws, and everything is going to reverse itself. Unfortunately, I don't think that's going to happen. We should continue to work that way, and maybe because sometimes we don't know the results. Certainly, I have found results being better than I had anticipated. But we're in the midst of this economic crisis. Something's going to happen with our world empire, and we as a nation, as a people, and as a younger generation as well, we will have to decide what we're going to do with our country. It will be decided. We won't have any choice. You cannot maintain the status quo. If you do nothing, you're going to get dictatorship. If we think it's worth fighting for, we're going to have to fight for it, and the enthusiasm is there for this. And we can restore the republic. That is the purpose. This week on one of the interview programs, somebody, they were asking me about the financial situation. They said, well, a lot of people wrote in there and got you to vote against this, and then at the end of the week they called and people voted, and they said, isn't that a good example of what a republic is supposed to do? And I said, no, that's not it. That's sort of closer to the dictatorship of the majority and the control by the special interest. That's not the republic that we're talking about. We're talking about a minimal federal government, one that has our courts and national defense and a few things that we might need. But the true republic is local government, not international government. It's local government, not congregated up in Washington, D.C., but at the local level, at the state levels, at the county levels, in minimal government. And we have to have confidence that free people can take care of themselves. It's confidence is what we need. We've lost our confidence that freedom really works. And it does. But the opportunity is here because most people in this country, if you ask them, does Washington really work? Does government work very well? And they'll say no. But there's still, the large majority in the country still think that they have to be taken care of. But that'll change because we won't be able to. And therefore, we will have to meet our responsibility and present our views in a positive way because we don't want to have to resort to violence, and it will be violent if we don't do something. Because there will be a lot of people very annoyed and very unhappy with the conditions we have. So it is a wonderful thing that we have our traditions. We're not in as bad a shape as the Soviet system was because they did not have our traditions. We at least know about, and the remnant remembers that we did have a gold standard and sound money and limited government and contracts and self-reliance and responsibility for ourselves. I mean, we have a tradition that is not that difficult. It just means that we have to emphasize it and be willing to go back to work. This is the reason why I come with a positive message and a congratulations to you for all that you have done and all the work that you have done. And also to say that if you continue this and rally the next generation and rally the troops now, do what you can to influence your current member of Congress. Do what you can to get better members of Congress. All these things. And everybody has a job, but it might not be the same job. It's not the same. Everybody has a different job. It turned out that my job was different than I would have predicted and different than other people. But if you know and understand what the issues are and you can defend our position and can defend what America is all about, believe me, there will be a role for you to play. And that is what we need. And our numbers are growing. It isn't like we're shrinking. And we don't have to have 51%. People who carry a revolution are small in numbers. They're dedicated. They're principled. They understand it. It might be 5% of the population. And I believe we're there. Because the people that supported our campaign this last year and a half, they were visible. They were more visible than all the other candidates put together because they were true believers. Now, will there be one organization? No, I don't think so. The more organizations, the better. But there should be one philosophy, the philosophy of liberty. Congratulations, and thank you very much for having me tonight.